Anyway, he's a professor in cognitive science here. He's also actually a visiting professor at the Bartlett in London, so he's really connecting.
Thank you, Eduardo. I thought I would inquire into what kind of neuropsychological properties would teach us about architectural shape and space. And the way I wanted to proceed is I don't have data on this. These would be methods by which one could proceed, I hope in a rigorous manner. So the topics I'd like to inquire into are what should we be measuring among many, many possible things. These are some that I think are tractable, and they include things like shape and volume, light, sound, smell, texture, and what effect they have on perception, measures of subjective well-being, and behavioral measures of social activity. I include social activity because as a voyeur in a school of architecture for many years now, I have come to learn that architecture is substantially about creating possibilities for social interaction. So I think it's a very central thing. And then the question follows, well, given that we would like to measure those things, how do we do that using methods of neuroscience? And principally, these are going to be the quantified self and some experimentation that I'll tell you about using generative methods of architecture. So what to measure? So here we have the same image, but with it cut off. And the question would really is, if this was real, what are the different experiences people would have in the space as we truncate the ceiling? And what is their own personal subjective experience? So we'd like to know, how do the sound properties bias the estimates of volume? We walk into a cathedral, we instantly have a grasp of the sound properties. You can all change it on your audio tuners and so on. Well, what effect does that have on our perception of the space? Then what do the light properties have on our estimate of the volume, the length, the height, the width, and smell and materials and texture? So these are all very obvious things. They're all tractable for architects, and we would like to understand it. How do we measure them? Well, one way to do it is to represent the space as a network of voxels, of 3D pixels. And what happens is we say in this space, we will manipulate light intensity or color frequency or sound intensity or texture at each voxel. We'll hold back now how we do that, but this is the conceptualization. So each voxel of this space is a vector of attributes, light intensity here, and as I walk through it, I'm sampling the space. I'm sampling this changing vector. And periodically, we have them estimate. So if we do this with eyes closed or with blindfolded, we say, okay, how big is this space? Where are you? Not where, I didn't say anything about position. But how big is the space? Then we could do it with earphones and have them do it with their eyes open. Interesting to see the relation between the sound and the visual. Maybe we can create illusions. So we have a lot of digital possibilities now. How about when we pump the space in certain ways and it sounds like you're in a cathedral, but in fact you're in a low ceiling? Well, this would be very nice if it turns out that we want prospect in the case of visual extension, where we don't have visual extension, or maybe we can create other experiences in people by altering things by digital means, and you all know this is going to happen. So the question is, can we get ahead of it? And we can also measure the effect of volume or other parameters on hedonic well-being. That's relative to a particular task, so we'd have to control it relative to task. So some of the measurements that people would use are in the quantified self region. These are the obvious easy reach. A person will wear something, a variety of things, not in their athletic outfit, because they'll be more businesslike. They would have the quality of the surrounding air. We can measure mood, skin conductance as a proxy for arousal, pulse oximetry to see how well they're just doing. Performance measures, cortisol levels for stress through the salivary system. And there are new portable scanners now. EEG can be worn on a little baseball cap, and a brand new one, which I just found out about today. It's very creepy, very creepy. But you don't have to be in some device that's like being inside a tube. It's not quite there, but it does. So they can have them move now like this, but they can't really have them walk around because of all those things. But that, you can tell, is just a short way off. So those things are coming, and we could measure such things. Now, we do know that structure can affect how we feel. For instance, Daniel Libeskind makes a business out of making people feel creepy. It's what he does for a living. And we could measure the stress and anxiety as subjects move through his spaces. This is the Berlin Jewish Museum, and you can see the design from above, and inside you can see these terribly confining, constricting, don't want to go there walls. Here we have, this is more in the terms of the semiotics of it, what a horrible choice, that way or that way. Oh, he did it on purpose, it's Sophie's choice. So we know this has an effect on us. We know that how you sit someone beside them with the power relations and the closeness and so on has an effect on patient dynamics and subjective feelings. We know that. So how do we measure it? Well, let's go to well-being measures. So I looked these up. I didn't know. I was hoping there would be some well-being measures. So psychologists like to talk about subjective well-being, and these are measures of how people feel about themselves. There's a transient one where it's called hedonic well-being, and that's I'm happy, or a collection of attributes like happy in the moment, or right now, or over some small duration. And there's eudaimonic, or psychological well-being, which these sort of have to do with, I'm doing okay in life. I'm well. No, things aren't going well for me. I think things are not so good. So that's an enduring, slow-changing one. It so happens that there is a way of measuring this. So the positive, the hedonic one, this is the transient one. This is the one we'd like to have on them, or you like to use when people are moving around in a space, or when they're in the doctor's office and we make manipulations to the office. We can use this one. And this positive effect has to do with the pleasantness or emotional mood, happy, enthusiastic, content, I'm doing fine, optimism. These are all attributes for something that is, of course, an underlying thing that we don't really know what it is. And the finding was that it's associated with more cerebral glucose metabolism in particular region, which means that we could track that. Okay, so we could use this. We could do this. Eudaimonic, from Aristotle, eudaimonia, is this longer-term thing, and it so happens that there is also something here. So this insular cortex, the GM volume of that, can be measured, and it seems to get bigger when, over time, you're in a good space, over time. Positive self-evaluation. And it's apparently, according to this study, it's reflected in 3 subscales of personal growth, personal positive relations, and purpose in life. Now, given this, I didn't think we could use this for anything, but of course we could, because we have people who live in different conditions. All of us live in somewhat different conditions. If we can partition us into meaningful categories of where you're living, what are the built structures that you're living inside, then we can do some big data studies. We can do big data studies, first by doing the behavioral analysis, the surveys, the questionnaires. Then once we categorize the people and we find a correlation between where they're living, we have prima facie data that there's something meaningful about the built environments that people are living in with respect to their long-term happiness. And now we can measure it also at the neuropsychological level to see if, in fact, that correlates with something down below. So these are some methods, it seems to me, that we could use approximately now, maybe not today, but pretty close to now. And what it says is that it's becoming possible to measure things at the neuropsychological level that are revealing things that architects would actually be interested in. Right? This is Eduardo's request. Every time a neuroscientist comes up and we hear excellent work, he says, well, you know, in medicine, they have translational medicine. Well, I don't hear any translational stuff. It's hard. You normally have to hire someone else to do the translation. So we need translational medicine. We need translational neuroscience to architecture. And these could be helpful with respect to transient well-being or changing spatial perceptions by manipulating things, and even long-term well-being. Okay, can we apply it to social measures of architecture? So we know that shapes and structures and light have an effect on the way we feel, and arguably also on social behavior, and I would like to convince you of that. I don't think I need to, but here we have a modern space. Modern architects would say, this is good use of open space. There are multiple ways that people can do things in this space, and if there's one thing we know about social spaces in the modern day, it's give them a lot of choice to do things. They want privacy, give them privacy. They want to be out there with several people. They want to sit by themselves, but in the open, give them that too. Okay, we know this standard stuff. So, of course, maybe it's just fashion. So, just fashion? So this is the Barbarian Group in Chelsea, Clive Wilkinson, a 4,400 square foot desk. Same guy. You know, it's pretty cool, right? Or is it going to get on your nerves after about 3 months? Here we have people saying, well, look, you know, social spaces, what you really want is to ensure maximize collisions, maximize the opportunity of people to find each other and bump into each other and so on. And we could use space syntax for that. We could do an analysis using space syntax to determine how effective a space is to increase the probability of two people striking each other, you know, connecting in a positive way, no, in the right way. And so we could do that, and we think that's got a positive social impact. We could have behavioral measures. Everyone wants to design some part, some place, something in the canteen, something that you have to do eventually. So there are behavioral measures for this. You could say, how much time do people spend in here? What are they doing? Why is it? Manipulate the light, the closeness of the tables, benches, chairs, which side do they want, so on. We can do those behavioral measures. And just to really convince you that we know that these things are meaningful, here is a hatch. This is a kitchen hatch, a serving hatch. And this was fashionable in the 50s and 60s. I probably don't have to say that to most of you. And it incorporates a social order. Right? We know who's behind there, and we know when they're behind there. We don't much support that view any longer, but that piece of architecture pushes it. And when you have that, you're not going to have people having a serious talk from inside the hatch to someone outside the hatch. Someone outside the hatch with drinks or sitting in the chair, they could have a serious talk, but the person inside the hatch, they won't have a serious talk with the person through the hatch. And they're not going to be speaking in a private, intimate way. Here, we're slightly moving a little more. So now the cook and the diner are a little closer together. It's a little more sushi style. And over here, we have a wide open one, and now it's a performance. Food is part of the activity. So it's completely opened up. Now, we know this is not just socially meaningful. This has an effect on people's performance, what they do in the space. So we could do some ethnographic measures. Who's talking to whom? How long do they talk? What do they talk about? Do they have estimates of social involvement? And we also know that if you change these structures, people, of course, experience different things because we're giving them different things to experience. So here's a sushi and a sushi bar for real. So we'll have behavioral measures, ethnographic measures of these things, and we can have other measures. We can do the quantified self measures and the hedonic well-being measures on the people in the different hatches, on the people in the different situations and arrangements, in the kitchen, in the canteen, and so on. One last thing I'd like to do, if I've got maybe 2 minutes left, I just want to say how you might go about designing your stimuli for this. So the generative design is a popular thing that's being taught everywhere now. And suppose I want to design a roof. I'm going to do it like this. I give you an architecture brief, an architectural brief. I say, okay, design a roof. I'm going to give you the footprint of the structure. I'm going to tell you where the top comes. Now you design the roof. I'll tell you about the site, and I'll tell you about the shading stuff. And don't forget, it has to fit. All right, how do you do it? Well, the way you do it nowadays for a lot of people is they use generative methods. So they don't say what cultural design they want the roof. They say, I want to maximize the shade over this region. I want to minimize the heat inside the building. I want to make sure the rain falls off. I know that the wind comes at a certain point, so I mustn't have too much shear. They take all these properties, they put them into some goodness measure that cracks it down to a single number, and then they run it as they generate new possible shapes. And they just keep optimizing it and optimizing and optimizing it until they come to shapes. Used by most of the big companies around the world, as I needn't again say to the architects. All right, so, oh yes, I know I'm late. So here is how we could do a slightly different thing. Now, normally when people are trying to invent shapes, they have to use their mind. But here, what we do is we say, okay, I want to minimize something. Let's say or maximize something. Suppose I want to maximize the amount of light in my voxel space. I want to maximize the amount of light, or I define attributes I want to have in that voxel space. Okay, I feed that in as the thing I want, and now I run the program, and it starts coming up with crazy shapes. We have to, in this case, we want to confine ourselves to the footprint and the volume, but I can come out with wild shapes. And the only thing that I know about those shapes is they satisfy the conditions. And we're going to optimize with respect to that. Fine. So this is a method we could use generative design in order to come up with particular shapes that are going to sort of be extreme versions of the things we want to measure. And now we put people in the one side, and we put people on the other side, on the other one, and we see how major the differences are. Why is this not moving? Okay, so it's interesting because we can use a property about the shape, like it's a really green building, and we would determine that normally after we've designed it, and then we say, how green is it? We can take, we want it to be this green, and then we see what shapes satisfy all the shapes that satisfy how green it is. So we can do it in the reverse way, and we can use that very idea in this case to say maximize the probability of two people encountering each other in 1 hour in a large space. We can choose whatever we want to maximize. So then we build charrettes, and we run behavioral and then neural tests. Conclusions. So the new technologies in quantified self, when coupled with something like generative design, would make it possible for us to design effective stimuli that have the specific properties we want to measure, and then we can compare them on people's behavior and also the behavioral measures that we're going to run on people as well. And the implication is that neuroscience for architecture is not really that far off in a meaningful way. Well-being, illusions, better experience, not so far. Thank you.